We're going to talk about the water cycle and the nitrogen cycle in this video. So the water cycle, you probably learned in middle school. Precipitation means rain or snow or whatever, some kind of water coming from the sky. And so here it comes down and it can go to the plants, or it can go underground. It can run off either above the ground, or it can go underneath to other water. It can be stored in an aquifer. It can be stored in a lake. Anyway, evaporation is when water comes up from the ground or from a water body and up into clouds. Up here it's called condensation when it forms clouds. Transpiration is one word that maybe you might not know. So transpiration sounds kind of like evaporation. I guess it kind of sounds like precipitation anyway. But remember the T and think tree for that. So transpiration is just evaporation from plants. So the water goes through a plant and it'll go up, into the air from there. And that's kind of the water cycle. There's a little bit more that I want you to know. Transpiration happens in plants, so I wanted to show you that. So transpiration is a process similar to evaporation. It's the loss of water from plants instead of just from, a puddle or something. And so it comes out here. So if this is a plant, and it's a red plant, I guess, and here are your leaves. The leaves have little holes in them that we talked about very briefly during photosynthesis. So here's a hole in them. These are called guard cells, and the stomata is the hole. And so here's where carbon dioxide can come in and oxygen can go out, and water can come out, really. So here's a picture from above. Let's see. This is an actual picture of them. And so these are the regular plant cells, and these are guard cells, and the whole is called the stomata. So here's a closed stomata and an open stomata. So when the plant's lost too much water, it will close up, and when it has plenty of water, it will open. So leaf transpiration occurs through stomata and can be thought of as a necessary cost associated with the opening of the stomata to allow the diffusion of carbon dioxide gas from the air for photosynthesis. And here it is open. Again, here the pore is called a stomata. So when you have a plant, I think I have this on the next page actually. Yep. When you have a plant here and there's water in the ground, every time the water's, remember, attracted to other water molecules. So here's a molecule of water, and this side is partially negative and this side's partially positive. Same thing with other water molecules. So this partially negative side is attracted to the positive side of that water molecule because of hydrogen bonding. And so when this one leaves the plant, it actually pulls the next one up. So that pulls the one behind it up, behind it, etc., until finally you get down here, and that's how the water actually enters the roots in the first place. So transpiration cools plants and enables mass flow of mineral nutrients and water from the roots to the shoots. So along with the water coming up, you also have minerals that are being brought up with it. And that was the water cycle. So now we're going to talk about the nitrogen cycle. And so I'll show you various parts of this as we go through this, and then I'll show you the whole thing at the end. So atmospheric nitrogen is right here. That's the nitrogen that's in the air, and it's triple bonded. So if you have N2, let's see, nitrogen has, is it 7 pluses? Let's see, 1, 2 electrons go in the first shell. So these are 7 protons, 2 electrons, then 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. If you remember from the beginning of the year, that means there's 1, 2, 3 lonely electrons. So when nitrogen and nitrogen come together, they form 3 bonds. That is super, super, super strong. A triple covalent bond is very, very strong. So it's very difficult to break. And so the atmosphere is about 80%, I mean a little bit less, but roughly 80% of the atmosphere is nitrogen. But plants can't use any of it. It's pretty awful. So what do? There are these things called nitrogen-fixing bacteria, and they can be either in the soil or they can be in these root nodules. So there are nitrogen-fixing bacteria, and they can actually take this very, very strong bond. N2 is this nitrogen to nitrogen triple bond, very, very strong bond, and they can change that to ammonia. And thank goodness they can, because plants cannot use this form, but when this is modified just a little bit, they can use it. And so these nitrogen-fixing bacteria can either just live in the soil freely, or they can live in the root nodules of certain plants, legumes. So some of these nitrogen-fixing bacteria live in the soil, and just free soil, and others live in root nodules of legumes. So those are things like clover and peanuts. And they live in a symbiotic relationship. which is so cool. So anyway, here's maybe clover roots, and if you look right here, those are root nodules. And so these form when bacteria invade the roots and stimulate the formation of these root nodules. And so the bacteria get a nice place to live with sugar that the plant made, and the plant gets nitrogen, so it's a win-win. So it's not just a symbiotic relationship, it is mutualism, which means that both are getting something good out of the deal. So here's the ammonia, and you get the ammonia when the nitrogen-fixing bacteria take atmospheric nitrogen. One thing my kids get confused about, the atmospheric nitrogen is up here in the atmosphere, but it can also dissolve. There's little spaces in the soil, and it can dissolve in here. So the bacteria can be, down a little bit. They don't have to be right up on the surface. So anyway, that's how you make ammonia. You can also make ammonia another way. Ammonia is also produced when animals or plants die or when they poop or pee. So here's an animal pooping or peeing and maybe some plants dying or whatever. And decomposers will break down the body parts, and what you're left with is ammonia. And so there are other bacteria. This is our next thing. The ammonia here is then converted to nitrites, which is this, or nitrates, by other soil bacteria or bacteria in water if we're there. The plants can then assimilate it. So assimilation means to take this nitrogen and take it into your body and make it part of yourself. So plants can assimilate the nitrates from the soil, and they need the nitrogen to make some things. So remember in the beginning of the year we talked about carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. And we said carbs and lipids are made out of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, but proteins are made out of chons, and nucleic acids are made out of chomp. So they both have this nitrogen that they need. So plants and animals need nitrogen for proteins and for nucleic acids. And so that process of taking in these nitrates is called assimilation. For animals to get nitrogen, we just have to eat plants or other animals. And here's the animal eating the plant. So that's how the nitrogen gets from the plant into the animal. Denitrifying bacteria, that's this. Right here, denitrifying bacteria can convert the nitrates back into atmospheric nitrogen. And so that's how the whole process starts all over again. And so here's the whole picture all together. We had plants and animals here, and the plants really need nitrogen, but they cannot get it from the atmosphere. So they get it from the soil. And so the plants will get it from nitrates in the soil. And the way they get the nitrates is because they got converted by bacteria from nitrite, and the way nitrite got into the soil is that they were nitrifying bacteria, and they made ammonia. The ammonia got into the soil when plants or animals die, and decomposers break it down, or when these nitrogen-fixing bacteria take atmospheric nitrogen and change that atmospheric nitrogen into ammonia. And then the very last part of the cycle is when denitrifying bacteria will take nitrates and change them back into this form that no one can really use except these folks. So this symbiotic relationship here is a huge advantage to a plant like this over a plant like this. This one just has to live in a nice, rich soil environment, whereas this one can live in a really soil-poor environment as long as it has nitrogen-fixing bacteria. Here's another extension of that. And so this is just showing that sometimes nitrogen from stuff like a factory or maybe runoff from agriculture, there's a lot of nitrogen that way. Sometimes that will run off into an aquatic environment. And now you're adding a whole bunch of nitrogen to the aquatic environment that maybe wasn't there before. And that can be a problem because it can cause this thing called eutrophication. So nitrogen can affect aquatic environments. Extra nitrogen from runoff, that means you put fertilizer on your grass or on a farm, on a field, and it gets into the water. That can cause increased growth in lakes and cause eutrophication. So this would be a regular pond, and there's a little bit of sediment just from normal runoff that happens when there's a rainstorm and soil is brought here. This is when maybe there's a farm or a factory that's added extra nitrogen to the environment in here, and so that causes an algae bloom, and that causes the plants to grow more, and animals, so everyone here is going to die, and eventually this whole thing gets filled up because there's been so much extra growth. So that's called eutrophication, and that's the end of my video for nitrogen cycle.